the arrivals.
Yeah, exactly. Good morning, everyone.
You pull up our deck, Christy.
I will. Excellent. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Oh, is it sharing?
Yeah. If you're just arriving, good morning. If you wouldn't mind putting your name and organization in the chat. I'm Shira Bernstein. I'm with the Mayor and Morris Kaplan Family Foundation. I'm joined today by Christy Uchida, the president of the Brinson Foundation. And we'll also hear from Jill Reid, who is the Chief Advancement Officer at High Jump, to give us a little perspective about participating as a nonprofit in the Common Report. So yeah, we're really lucky today to be joined by a variety of folks. We could tell from the registration list that it's a mix of both funders and nonprofits that are currently not participating in the Common Report, and we're guessing are interested in learning more to see if it might be something that makes sense to join at some point. And we also have some folks whose organizations are participating, and maybe they are staff who have not been as familiar with how it works or its origins, and maybe just a refresher or an intro of what it is. So we're happy to have all and everyone. And yeah, our goals today are really to first just give an overview what it is, what is the Common Report, what are its origins, how did it come about, how it works. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and we'll also tell you a little bit about who's participating, both funders and nonprofits, about its growth over time, and next steps if you are interested or have more questions. So yeah, let's jump in. Next slide. So those are our emails there. You should have access to those too, and we'll put them again at the end for you to note. Let me put in the chat, I'll be referencing the Common Report, but if you want to actually open up the template, sort of after this or as we're talking, you'll see a link in the chat both to the CCAPS webpage, and at the bottom of that page, there's a link that says the Common Reporting template, and we'll keep that updated over time as we make tweaks and additions of participants. So that's where you can always find the most updated version, but if you just want to link straight to that document, you'll see that second link there in the chat. You can access that directly as we're talking. Yeah, next slide, please, Christy. So yeah, let me just tell you kind of the brief story of what it is, how it came about. Basically, about 8 years ago, the problem to be solved that a small group of funders and nonprofits came together around was this idea, initially in the CCAPS space, so in the college career access and persistence space, that there's a pretty finite, like a cohesive group of funders and nonprofits that have sort of a very similar set of funders, but that the nature of reporting for grants is that it's a lot of similar questions with a lot of sort of variations of those narratives in different ways, in different formats, and at various times of the year. And so the idea was, what if we could just bring some efficiency to that reporting by bringing together, again, initially a group of 4 funders and 4 nonprofits to start in this pilot, to say, okay, we'll have one template with a set of questions, and we'll designate certain points in the year where it won't necessarily be the best fit for everyone, but that you only have to do this one template twice a year, and we'll see if this actually sort of saves time for nonprofits and ultimately allowing them more time to fulfill their missions, right? So that was the goal. We intentionally, from the start of that, made the template probably longer. In other words, probably more comprehensive in what it was asking for than maybe any individual funder might alone have asked for. But the idea was that if we could broaden the umbrella, sort of broaden the tent of, okay, this could, we hope, fulfill what any funder might actually want to know, then we could get enough funders in the mix that would accept this, such that we could bear out this hope that it would bring some efficiency to nonprofits to be able to do this. And so that's essentially what that goal has continued to be. It has evolved over time based on feedback from all parties who are involved. Just as a quick example, when we started this, there were 2 full reports per year, February 15th and August 15th. But in the interim, we had these quarterly checklists if there were any sort of major updates. We found that they weren't super informative. If there was something big going on, funders usually already knew because of communications, and if it was minor, it wasn't that actually helpful. And so that was the type of thing we sort of worked through over time by having frequent check-ins, both formally and ad hoc, to figure out kind of what worked for people. So let me get into a little more about kind of how it actually works. Next slide, please. So we tend to update it each year, sometimes with regular things that need updating. You'll see on the last page there are instructions for each funder of how to submit. So staff changes, those things have changes, and also with changes in who's participating, so additions of nonprofits and funders. The submission dates, as I mentioned, continue to be February 15th and August 15th. Of course, if it's on a weekend, the day before or after that. And really the way it works is pretty low tech. It can be one email on one of those dates, BCCing all funders participating. And here it is. Here are my PDF attachments, here are my Word doc attachments. You'll see some funders might have some additional specifics in terms of their submission instructions, but generally speaking, it's really just one email to all funders with that one report that you've created, that a nonprofit has created on those dates. So right now, we'll get into this a little bit. We have about 30 participating nonprofits, about 20 funders participating, and we'll get into this a little more later too, sort of, what it takes to come on board as a nonprofit. What we found is that in order to kind of reach that threshold of efficiency, it does take a nonprofit to have about 4 participating funders for that to bear out, and general operating support as well. And I'll get into kind of the why of that a little later too. All of this is voluntary, and what I mean by that is that even if a foundation is listed here as participating, we would still check with that foundation anytime we add a nonprofit to say, hey, XYZ nonprofit is interested and seems eligible to join the common report. Would you accept XYZ's nonprofit's common report in lieu of your reporting requirements for that grant? And so there might be things about that grant that we don't know about. Maybe there are other sort of special reporting requirements because it's some project-based thing. And so maybe it doesn't make sense to have this generic template. So any given participation is still very much sort of a funder or a nonprofit saying, yes, I want in, I want to do this. And that goes on nonprofit side as well. We found that there are times when it just doesn't make sense. For example, if all 4 participating funders are those that may have super flexible reporting requirements to begin with, or very minimal to begin with. So for a nonprofit, it's possible that doing this may actually be more than they otherwise would do for those specific funders that they have that are on this list. So all that to say is that the formality of this in terms of participation is really this collective of folks who have all agreed to do this because it benefits us collectively in some way. But if at any point that's not the case, one, we want to know that because we want to try to improve this process and the template, and 2, it's always voluntary both in and out. So basically Christy and I are sort of have stepped forward to help manage this and continue to recruit prospective organizations and funders and see if there are other things that are working and not working, but there's nothing formal about that either. We would love anyone's input who is interested in helping with that process of maintaining this and keeping it successful and growing.
Thanks, Shira. So now I'll just share the list of who participates. So here are currently the 30 participating nonprofits, and this is also on that first page of the template. Actually, Shira, maybe you want to repost again the template link since a few more folks have joined since then. So as you can see, there are right now 30 participating nonprofits, and you'll notice some of them are kind of these core college and career success organizations, folks like Bottom Line and 1 Million Degrees. Several years ago, we expanded, as Shira said, and now, so you see some kind of more broadly education and workforce kinds of organizations. You see CARA and VOCEL and folks like that. And then some are a specific part of an organization. So For example, the Student Emergency Fund of All Chicago, that's a fund that is funded by quite a few of these funders. Or Accelerate U, that's a part of it's a program of National Louis University. So that's the part that participates in the Common Report. And then here is the list of participating foundations. So right now there are 23 funders. As Shira said, nonprofits need to be funded by at least 4 of these in order to participate. We've just found that to be kind of the threshold at which it makes it efficient to participate. And as Shira said, we need to get mutual agreement from both the operating nonprofit and the funder that it makes sense to both submit and to accept the report. All right, and then here you can see the growth of the Common Report participation over time. So as Shira said, it started pretty small in 2017. It's been mostly upward, but not entirely. You see sometimes the numbers decrease. For example, as it's indicated in the footnote, there was a pilot in Lake County in 2023 and 2024, which has since ended. So the number of nonprofits decreased a little bit from 2024 to current 2025. But after this webinar, perhaps the number will go up for 2025. If some of you who are on this Zoom or listen to the recording after want to join us, we'd be glad to add you. And, so maybe some of these numbers will be going up. Okay. And then we thought it would be helpful to hear from a peer who has been participating in the Common Report. So today we are grateful that Jill Reid is joining us from High Jump. And Jill has many years of experience in development, and she has been serving as the Chief Advancement Officer for High Jump, which, as many of you probably know, is a sort of middle school enrichment program. Jill's been there for the last 9 years. And we're really lucky to get her time today because she has very limited time. She's going to be stepping down from High Jump at the end of June. And, during that time, their revenue has overall tripled. So she's been very busy. And, there is actually a search going on that I think they've probably started some interviews, but if folks are interested in, I'll just put in the chat a link to that posting.
Please.
And I'll just say, I've personally known Jill for much longer than she's been at High Jump, for probably a couple decades now. And also Brinson has been funding High Jump for the whole time they've been part of the Common Report. But I know that Jill is a really thoughtful and strategic nonprofit leader. She has worked tirelessly to raise funds for a number of really meaningful organizations. We really appreciate her being here today, and I will have her take it away.
Thank you, Christy. That's really kind. One other thing I'll add is I started my career in 1997 at the Chicago Community Trust, working for the archivist, Barbara Long, at the time. And my job was to provide research for both people like Maria Whelan, who were reviewing grants, as well as the development department. So this conversation is close to my heart, and I have part of what helps me be able to communicate with foundations is having seen it from the other side as people are reviewing grants and reports.
So Jill, maybe you want to share some about the context for High Jump's involvement and sort of what were you doing pre-Common Report?
So before the Common Report, I mean, we have a set of evaluation data, financial reporting, and narrative that because we are a school-based organization, I tend to start, and our fiscal years on June 30, we look at it really as a school year. So we would spend the summer, develop our set of data and narrative, both for proposals and for reports. But then, as many of you on my side of the fence know, we would have a core set of information, but then need to adjust it for each place. And currently, we still we receive grants from 18 foundations right now, 6 of whom are part of the Common Report. So we still are doing that. It's not like it went away. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but have you seen some efficiencies with those 6 funders that do participate? How has what's been the impact of participating in the Common Report?
Well, certainly it saves a lot of time. And I think in general, we do see a trend of, or at least I have seen a trend of, even outside of the Common Report, there not being such a huge broad range of random requests coming at us. But yeah, it is saved, I mean, I didn't calculate in terms of hours, but as a development director running a small shop, you're constantly churning in your mind, how much time is wasted that could be spent finding new funding. And I think that having those 6 foundations has saved us a lot of time.
Mhm. And so you are able to basically send one email twice a year that takes care of those half dozen foundations.
That's right. That's right. So the gathering, and I will say too that the Common Report is developed in a way that that is now our basis. Like I said before, we had a sort of what we call our boilerplate proposal and report that we would start the year with. And really the Common Report for reporting is now our boilerplate that we will then adjust. I mean, most foundations I really don't have any anymore that want 2 reports a year. That isn't as common as it used to be. Or they used to be separated into just financial report, mid-year, and narrative report at the end of the year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there probably aren't funders in general who require 2 reports a year, but I think the cadence of having the Common Report twice a year is to try to accommodate a whole bunch of different funders who, these were kind of a couple of points we could agree on a timing, the February 15th date, sort of shortly after the beginning of a new calendar year. And then the August 15th date, sort of, again, thinking about the school cycle. But to your point and what Shira said, if the Common Report actually is more burdensome, if it is actually just more than funders need, that's okay. Like, we're not trying to make more work for folks. But hopefully having it routine makes it somewhat helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes it helpful. And then I think just how concise it is, I think many funders, the range of information will also change that they requested. So knowing that it's for the most part going to be the same. I mean, even many people need extra different information for their boards, which is fine. But having that concise set of reporting definitely saves us time.
And have there been any caveats or like speed bumps in your participation that things you've had to work through to adjust to using the Common Report?
For us, not really. The biggest challenge that we have, and I think you've probably heard this from a lot of your grantees, is just as a smaller nonprofit, we now don't have a full-time measurement and evaluation specialist. So the expectation, the differential between what we can do, that's always our biggest challenge. Developing a set of measurement and evaluation framework that works. And I've worked at multiple places. It's different for each one, but I've really only worked at one place, Illinois Action for Children, where we had a huge department that we could fund for measurement and evaluation. So to be honest, we haven't experienced, there's little tweaks that that we would like to see. And one of them is already on I prepared some of these before I saw your presentation, and I think you're going to get to it, but having one portal would be very helpful, or at least really clear upfront, knowing
that is a common request. Yes, I
Yeah.
understand that.
But for us, the adjustment to using it was not difficult. because we already had a framework, we, you know, in that first year had to just look at how do we, you know, do they align? And because the common report, like I said, it is not, you know, in the worst case scenario, there is, you know, requests for very random and very specific data, pulled in different ways, both financial. I mean, just having 6 organizations where they want financial data the same way, that in itself is huge. I always say that, like, both for a proposal and report, the hardest part is often the budget. Like, which format do they want the budget in? So that saves us a lot of time. But in terms of transitioning to having these 6 organizations use it, it was, you know, in that first year, you know, really seeing what aligned. But after that, I would not say road bumps at all.
Okay, well, great. Well, that's good to hear. And then I guess just to finish up this section, do you have any advice on, you know, as we continue to try to expand or improve the common report, anything you can think of? I mean, you mentioned if we had a common portal, that would be helpful. I hear that.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, our main wish is that more of our funders were using this. As I mentioned, you know, it's like you said, the 5. We just got a new one who's participating, which is great. So we're at 6, but that means, you know, the remainder we're doing different. So the more funders who participate in this in the community, the better.
Oh, well, thank you, Jill. We really appreciate it. We'll get to Q&A in just a moment, and I'm sure Jill can answer any questions also at that point. But maybe, Shira, I'll go on to the next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. That hit on a lot of things that we were going to cover point blank. But let me just kind of tick through because this may answer some questions folks have. I think I alluded to earlier. So this is most effective we found for general operating grants. And the reason for that is because the common piece, right? So if there's a funder for whom you're reporting very specific information about a certain project or initiative or program, then that may not be able to be sort of one thing that you can send to multiple funders. So that's one caveat. In terms of foundations that we found this to be a good fit for, it tends to be those that have fewer entrenched processes or less complex systems to begin with. So, which isn't to say that larger foundations haven't found a way to make it work. And sometimes there are carve outs, for example, just in their education portfolio. But we have found there's kind of more things to work through in a foundation that has more complex staffing or tech kind of ways going about their reporting. Some drawbacks that were mentioned, the common portal is up here because that is feedback that we've gotten before and certainly take seriously. I think this is one of those kind of tensions between sort of the common nature of it. Some of the foundations that are participating, and we want them to because the more the better, right? As Jill said, in terms of bringing that efficiency. Some do just have their own grant management systems for whom it is necessary to upload documents directly into that system. And so it's still the same template, but not kind of one click send, given that there are these variations of how to submit depending on the funder. So for the time being, we haven't figured out a way to get around that portal issue. So that's sort of the way that stands for now. The timing, as we talked about, is not ideal for everyone, and 2, maybe more than both funders need sometimes and nonprofits would otherwise do. As Christy said, it's balancing both some content-driven reporting aspects in terms of, you know, school year and calendar year. And the other thing driving that is just sort of when foundations might need information, which often is connected to their own committee meetings and board meetings, which all happen at various points in the year. So we're just hopeful that by having these 2 different, you know, are maybe somewhat arbitrary points, that it'll sort of have wide enough coverage to reach everyone's needs. And for those that it doesn't quite match up in terms of when data is available, we'll work with you or let you know kind of how other nonprofits have dealt with that in the past. And again, it may just be more than some funders can even have the capacity to read, given that this is twice per year. You know, ideally, all of it would be digested and synthesized and analyzed. And we know kind of given the quantity, sometimes that's not always the case, just as a reality. And just to say what this is not, you'll see in the template, the sole bullet point around outcomes and metrics is submitted based on your funder's requirements. And so you might have multiple funders that will accept that in the same format, but this does not check off, let's align on metrics across the sector. This is still open-ended in that regard. Before we jump into Q&A, I'll just start with a common question that we get, which is, let's say, from a nonprofit. Okay, this sounds great. How do I join? Just to outline what that would look like would be you contacting me or Christy. Our first question to you would be, can you please look at this list of funders and tell us which are your general operating funders, and that there would be at least 4. And then Christy and I would reach out to those funders directly and ask them, hey, so-and-so nonprofit's interested in joining. Would you accept their common report from them? And if so, and there's enough, great, you're on board. And we'll start for, at this point, we have a pretty long runway till August 15th. So we would probably start with the next submission date. And same goes with funders. We would ask you, which nonprofits are on this list. Great, let's let them know you'd accept the common report from them. Let's add you. And then we would always be interested kind of on both sides as sort of we add to this iteratively. Great, what other funders are not on here that maybe we should be talking to? Or what nonprofits are actually have a lot of common funders on this list that actually could be submitting the common report. So this kind of grows iteratively as we continue to add funders and nonprofits. Yeah, let's open the floor. I'd say Christy, Jill, or I can answer questions. And we also have a number of folks on the call that have been participating in the common report. So if you have insights around your own participation, we would welcome that as well.
Hi, everyone. This is May. This is my first time being here in this group, so great to meet you all. Here representing the Square One Foundation, and I'm wondering if you've gotten many requests for taking this to like common site visits, like sharing and collaborating on that, or even like renewal cycles. Yeah, or does that happen just kind of informally?
Yeah, I'll start with the common application question and common renewal question, because we've definitely gotten that. Right, because as we've said, like this is about reporting on existing funding. There have been a number of common application attempts over the years. May, you're probably familiar with them because some have been created by Forefront, and some I think have kind of collapsed under their own weight. There was just, too many funders wanted too many different things. And unlike this reporting, which is meant to kind of be minimal, an application just grew and grew and grew in order to accommodate everyone. So that I don't think right now there is really a working common application in the Chicago area. In terms of site visits, I think that's great. I have informally done that with other education funders for sure. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any formal process that's going on right now, but May, let's totally hook up and do some common site visits together. I'm totally up for that.
Yeah, and I would just add that, again, informally, I think the common report for some funders, Kaplan, and I think maybe Brinson as well, the common report has actually served as a lot of meat of a renewal application. So by already getting the common report, that's a lot of the content that we already need for the application with maybe a few supplemental attachments. So yeah, again, that's kind of ad hoc. And then for the site visit, I'd say, yes, that is informally happening kind of, here and there. But what nonprofits have done, and I think we have a pretty large number of grantees now that have been doing this, is hosting their own sort of investor council, funder meetings at regular times during the year, and often including, most of this list, probably with some others as well, of funders they're already submitting to. And so while it's not necessarily being organized on the funder end, nonprofits are making use of this common group and hosting their own meetings and updates.
I'll just say we would love there to be another Chicago area common application. I would, speaking from, we used that over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question?
Right.
My name is Alex Bascarero, and I'm here in the capacity of being an evaluation partner to the CME Group Foundation. And the system that we're currently using, we try to make it as easy as possible on grantees to report, but also find that from year to year, we need to make some edits to the reporting survey that we design and use. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about the updates that you all said you kind of make from year to year. I think you said that funders can submit suggestions for updates to the common report from year to year. So curious about sort of what that process looks like. And then Jill had mentioned earlier that she really appreciated that there aren't very big changes year to year and there's a lot of consistency. So again, just want to hear a little bit about like, how do you take suggestions for changes into consideration and then make the final decision about what actually changes so you can continue to guarantee some of that consistency for grantees and keep things easy for them?
Yeah, great question. I'd say maybe in those first couple years, we were tweaking more with some of the actual narrative questions. Updates the past, at least 5 years have really been around just updates to submission instructions in terms of staffing changes, additions of participants, and the early on omission of the quarterly checklist. And so we were having a lot more meetings in those early days, maybe once a year, twice a year with all participants to sort of get that active feedback. Honestly, we haven't really, we're always open to feedback. I'd say if it were a really specific content suggestion, I think we would want to float that among, pretty significant number of participants to make sure that worked. That hasn't really come up. And I think you're right. A lot of it is both maintaining that commonality and that consistency over the years. So given that this is sort of a voluntary collective, we would need buy-in for any significant shift to that.
Yeah, and I'll add that, maybe I'll just share the screen of the common report, the content of it. So, it's a pretty simple template, right? So the first page of the template is just who's participating. And it's really, the second page of the template are all of the instruction. Like this is all there is to it, right? So all you provide, twice a year is your name, contact, and the time frame, something about your operations, so how you're doing financially. And then this attached metrics and outcome data requested by each foundation, submission preferences listed. So this is in the next time. So there are not common metrics, right? So this is something else that was tried in the past, was to get common metrics and a common, at one point there was, a massive spreadsheet of data that multiple folks were trying to send every year. So like when, I think, Jill, when you mentioned that the metrics you're sending, like that's something I think that was kind of co-created between High Jump and a couple of its funders. And then other funders, as they saw it, they're like, oh yeah, send us that, that's fine. And in the of your half dozen common reporting funders. So again, there aren't, narrow templates or guidelines. There's a lot of flexibility in how this is reported. And then, a narrative, 500 words of progress, if progress was not achieved, some highlights, changes, key learnings. And again, you can see approximate word counts there to try to keep things manageable. So
yeah, and the other thing I would say too is that it's still helpful to us for this to be a common and a starting point, but of the funders who we work with who use it, we still can provide additional, information. We speak with them, and yeah, so it's not even when you request extra information, it still saves time for us.
good to hear.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Hey,
Feedback,
Yvette.
you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. So two things. So in the template, I think I missed this before. So you're saying that grantees would have to attach metrics from each foundation?
No, yeah. Only if that's mutually agreed to.
Well, then it's not a common report if you've got a bunch of different funders, right? I mean, unless I'm reading it wrong, could you share it again? Sorry.
Yeah, of course, of course. Here, let me share. Here, go ahead and someone else answer while I'm.
Yeah, so I'd say the common part of this is around the narrative.
Okay.
And for the metrics, there may be variations among funders. My sense is that sort of in the informal way Chrissy just described of High Jump kind of developing this with a couple funders and other funders saying they wanted that. My sense is that probably if there's one format that works for maybe the most rigorous data-driven funder, that likely works for other funders as well. But it's true that the data piece is not necessarily uniform if there are other funders that have various requirements, whereas the narrative would be consistent.
Okay, so where it's programming number one, attach metrics and outcomes as requested by each foundation, that means that doesn't mean by each foundation. It just means if you're sending this report to Polk, you attach a certain thing. If you send it to Kaplan, you attach a different thing. I'm reading it as like attaching everything to this.
Yeah, the way it's typically done, the way we receive reports as Kaplan participating is we get one report and we can see, you know, often they're CC'd, all the other funders, and it's just one PDF with their narrative responses and one Excel spreadsheet with all the data. And so I'm inferring from that all of their participating funders are okay with receiving that same data spreadsheet as they've presented their outcomes, their metrics.
Okay, fine. Yeah,
Does that,
I'm sure
answer
I'm sure
your question?
Suzanne Kerbo's ears are ringing right now. So I'm trying to channel her, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll hold my other thoughts for later.
It's okay. And, you know, Yvette, to your point, I mean, and why Shira said, you know, a lot of the funders are kind of smaller or newer family foundations, you know, because Polk is pretty big and has a lot of infrastructure or some infrastructure, right? And so we understand like it might not always work for everyone's grants management systems and, you know, the,
Okay.
yeah, so it's okay. Rosa, I see your hands raised.
Good morning, Rosa Zamora from New Root Learning Institute. Yvette, I could answer a little bit of some of those questions,
Yeah.
and I had another one. So we have what's called like an outputs table that is pretty consistent in terms of like, as a nonprofit organization, like the typical things that we look at in terms of outputs, like how many schools we serve, how many students we serve, how many adults we serve, because we do capacity building. And so across all, like we have, I think, 8 participating foundations that are part of CCAPS. And so there's some things that we always provide as an organization equally to all of them. And so we update that for them. And then there's like more of like the impact data. And so the impact data that we want to provide all of them around the adult capacity building work that we're doing, but then also like student related metrics. And so it's like a the way I see it, it's kind of like a snapshot of your outputs and impact that like is consistent across all the partners that you are all the funders that you have. And so my question is that we've been a partner for quite some time now. And as time progresses, our work has also evolved. So an example of that is like we're less student facing and we're more adult capacity building. And I have a lot of hesitation about like messing with our chart. And so like I try not to change the outputs too much. You know, we might add something, but we're very mindful of what we to take off. And then the same with our impact data. I feel like we've been trying to add over time. What we've been working on is adding more capacity building metrics, right? So how are we building capacity with adults? But then that means that then we're like, well, should we remove the ones for students? So my question is, do you think we can take the liberty to make those kind of changes? Would you like for us to check in with you all? Because, you know, when we send out the proposals, like they're consistent in terms of that of those outputs, and we want to include them in the CCAPS report, but we also don't want to mess with it too much that it feels too different from what we've provided in the past. So just some guidance around that. I was curious. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, great question. I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that this is just a template, right? Like this won't substitute meaningful relationships and conversations between grantees and funders as the work shifts over time, as the narrative about the work shifts over time. And like with any reporting, we don't want the numbers to stand by themselves. They should be meaningful, right? And they should reflect what's important to the organization. So if, for valid reasons, that does shift for the organization, it's important to bring everyone along with that and to tell that story, and for them not to just show up as a number in the next report, or conversely, arbitrarily keeping that consistency that no longer reflects the core of the work. So to me, that really is a conversation, and maybe that's a group funder meeting before that happens, or to, you know, or just to preview what a new report might look like with those new metrics, maybe carry over for another year or so the old ones to kind of see that shift. You know, I'm sure there are different technical ways to go about that, but I think that's where kind of the conversation around that narrative has to take place, coupled with the report. Does that make sense?
That is very helpful. Thank you so much. Yes.
And I'll just add that, you know, Shira and I are not gatekeepers for this process. I mean, we want to help facilitate it, and but, you know, like, so, you know, Brinson has not funded New Route, so, you know, we don't need to be in that conversation that you might want to have with those funders as, you know, your model is evolving over time. That's fine, right? Like, you know, you all should totally, you know, have those appropriate conversations with, you know, the folks who are funding you, like Kaplan.
And Rosa, I'd just say, like, it is also very normal for things, you know, for example, when CPS, one of our key data points had to do with testing, that CPS changed, you know, around, and so that open line of communication to say, hey, you know, this was one of our key outcomes, and it's no longer even an option for us to get it. What can we do? And so having a few people like who you can have those deep, you know, what would be meaningful to you, and then restructuring it. It's almost just, in my experience, like from working with funders, it's almost a signal. If you never change it, then like what's happening? You know, are you really, you know? So it's a sign of health at a nonprofit. Every, you know, at least 3 years, you should be adjusting.
That's a
Yeah.
good point. Well, I don't want to cut off questioning, you know, and we're happy to stay, but maybe I'll just reshare my screen with the just a few next steps. And then, you know, again, if folks have questions, we can keep talking. So, you know, as I've kind of indicated, and well, we said, if following this, you'd like to join the Common Report, or if you know others who you think would be a good fit, please let us know, or feel free to reach out to them directly. And again, this is operating nonprofits and or funders. You know, Shira and I can help facilitate some communication of, you know, whether or not it does make sense to join. If we get some new participants confirmed, you know, in the next, I mean, we don't want it to linger, so maybe in the next month or so. As Shira said, we have this long runway until the August 15th deadline, but, you know, we want to kind of get the template updated for the current year and get it distributed and updated on Forefront's website, those kinds of things. So, you know, we'll you know, try to wrap up this set of changes, I don't know, next month or so, maybe. And then, as I said, Shira and I have no proprietariness over this Common Report at all. We're totally welcome others to step in and help, or take over, or, you know, to help manage the back end, like, you know, but we are happy to try to help facilitate, and here's our contact information if you need it. Great. I don't know, any other thoughts or questions?
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Thank you all for joining.
Exactly.
Well.
Thanks, everybody.